We Teach Well welcomes you to this discussion, part of the Victorian Government's Digital Innovation Futures Festival for 2023. That's always such a mouthful. Whether you're watching it now or later on demand, we're really thrilled that you've tuned in. In a moment, I'm going to hand you over to the remarkable Adriano Di Prato, whose blog post, The Age of Human, gave me the idea for this panel. However, before I do that, We Teach Well acknowledges the sovereignty of the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded and that the land is and always will be Aboriginal land. As an education business, We Teach Well recognises the value of traditional Aboriginal education systems and promotes increased involvement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in education at state and federal level. It would take way too much time to list all of Adriano's accomplishments in education, but I do want to mention a few because they speak to the future. He is co-host of one of Australia's leading educational podcast, Game Changers, and he is the co-author of the Hawker Brownlow education bestseller, Game Changers, Leading Today's Learning for Tomorrow's World, and is the new academic operations manager at LCI Melbourne, which he will perhaps tell us what that stands for, a progressive private provider of higher education in the fields of art, design, and enterprise. So over to you, Adriano.
Well, thank you very much, Carolyn, for the wonderful welcome. And it's a real privilege to be here in support of your work in education and also to be part of Victoria's Digital Innovation Futures Festival. Today, we gather here to explore the intriguing intersection of AI and the age of the humans, where technology and humanity converge in this kind of delicate dance of progress and, of course, responsibility. In this era, shared by rapid advancements and transformative change, we pause to reflect on our priorities and envision a future that fosters regenerative and human-led learning ecosystems. The words of Sir David Attenborough echo in our minds, and his quote is, "The Garden of Eden is no more. We have changed the world so much that scientists say we are now in a new geological age, the Anthropocene, the age of the humans." So it is with this context that we embrace Generation Alpha, the cohort of learners born between 2010 and 2025 who will inherit the world we shape today. With us, we have an esteemed panel, Carolyn, of educational change makers who will shed a light on the opportunities and, of course, the challenges presented by AI in education. So let's meet each of one of our guests one at a time. First of all, Leon. Leon is a director, of course, of Young Change Agents and joins us today with his deep commitment to fostering an entrepreneurial spirit amongst young learners of Generation Alpha. Through language, innovation, and critical thinking, Leon empowers young minds to create their own paths, leveraging the potential of AI while preserving the essence of human integrity and ingenuity. Second, we have the wonderful Michelle Dennis, Head of Digital at Haileybury College. Welcome, Michelle, who brings with her an extensive experience in digital education to our panel. With a focus on environmental consciousness and a purpose-driven mindset, Michelle strives to cultivate a regenerative educational ecosystem that prepares Generation Alpha to address global challenges and contribute positively to the world. And finally, a good friend to everyone, and especially my own, is Lauren Sayer, who's the Director of Curriculum at the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. Lauren joins us today and draws upon her extensive experience and expertise in pedagogy and curriculum development, bringing a unique perspective to our conversation on AI and the age of the humans. Her commitment to fostering a learning environment that embraces innovation while staying true to the essence of humanity aligns perfectly with our exploration today. So, to Leon, to Michelle, to Lauren, welcome to you all. Now that we've kind of covered those introductions, let us delve into the heart of our conversation by exploring the opportunities and challenges that AI presents in the realm of education. As we explore these questions, we hope to gain valuable insights into the challenges, opportunities, and ethical considerations surrounding AI in education. So let us now engage in a very thought-provoking conversation that paves the way for a future where the age of the humans and the power of AI can coexist in harmony. Let's see if we can achieve that in this very short time that we've got together. I might come to you, Leon, for the very first question. The rise of AI has brought about numerous advancements in technology, and its potential in education is vast. In your opinion, what are some of the most exciting opportunities that AI can bring to the table for all learners?
Thanks, Adriano, and thanks for the introduction. Look, I think that at its best, like any kind of technology, AI should be able to free us from some of the drudgery of some of the tasks that we've burdened ourselves with, particularly in education. You know, we love burdening ourselves as educators and as students with a few tasks that we could hopefully automate away or replace. What I think we've got to keep core here is that we want AI to be offloading those kinds of tasks, and we want to keep the critical and creative thinking for ourselves. So, you know, this whole session really is about the human and the AI, and I'm thoroughly on the side of the humans in this one. As a literature student myself and an undergraduate of literature, I think that there are some realms that we really want to keep within our own remit. So, you know, although we are seeing a rise of generative AI in particular being used for creative purposes, I think that we'll get the best value for ourselves and our students if we really focus in on creativity and critical thinking being our role, and we use AI as a tool to kind of support us on the side, rather than replacing some of those fundamental things.
Thank you. We are going to be exploring the nature of nurturing creativity and critical thinking very soon in our conversation. But I now might come to you, Michelle, regarding that same question. What is most exciting for you in terms of opportunity for learners that perhaps AI can bring to the table?
If we do things right, and I think we are at a stage where we're working out how we're responding to things. So there's a lot in the air about how we approach it. But if we do things right, I hope that AI can provide a bit of a leveler in terms of accessibility. I hope that through the use of AI, we're able to do things like reach students at where they're at, rather than necessarily hoping that we're going to reach all the students with the same kind of educational support. Not that it replaces humans or teachers in the classroom, but more that it can help us better meet each child where they are. And I think that it's fascinating, and that I think that it is encouraging more critical thinking already being brought into the classroom. And so while it raises the need for critical thinking with, you know, things like bots and misinformation, like we have some real dangers ahead, but it's focused our attention on developing those skills more. So I come from a place of optimism in that, like, as the threats increase, so do our responses. And some things that we just assumed were natural in students, we're actually focusing on developing.
Yeah, look, this is really interesting what you've just shared there, because so much of what you've just shared there is accelerating the personalization of learning, you know, for the inherent needs of each learner. In the context of higher education, where I'm at LCI Melbourne, what's really interesting is at the beginning of this year, I introduced a renewed approach to what we call equitable learning plans. But of course, in a secondary school context, you call them individual learning plans. They're really not that dissimilar, but it's a very foreign concept for many academics at a higher education point of view, who are just quite content to come in and deliver their lectures to a cohort of students and keep moving. But because of the intimate nature of the way in which we do things around our own distinctive excellence model at LCI Melbourne, we started using chat to actually better formulate adjustable teacher arrangements to best suit students, particularly those who are neurodivergent or those who had some type of diagnosed disability. And we took their actual psych reports, placed it into chat. We crafted a prompt where we invited chat to provide us with a clear summary from what the psychologist is saying in relation to the inherent needs of that individual learner. provide us with, 3 or 4 or 5 different kind of strategies that we can automatically adopt. We did all that. What we then did was we took the various lectures that were set for the units that student was going to have. We put it through chat with the lens of personalizing it. And we're able to create individual handouts and information guides for each of those learners within 30 seconds. And what we have seen really quickly is an acceleration of students better connected to learning, better connected to their feedback in an accelerated way or at a scale that I hadn't seen before. Lauren, this is a space that I know that you play in all the time and your entire educational career has been one of the intersection of wellness and learning in a really pronounced way. You're now at the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority, and no doubt this is at the forefront of lots of conversations about what could be. From your perspective, what also excites you about what AI can bring to the table?
Thanks, Adriano. What excites me is, I think the first bit is this is the worst version of AI that we're ever going to have today. And, that's important to remember because it will continue to evolve. But I think what both Leon, Michelle, and yourself have spoken around is that opportunity to personalise and the opportunity for curriculum to be looked at in the three-dimensional lenses that it's always been aspired to. We don't want to just look at curriculum in terms of a PDF. We want to be able to look at the interplays with our critical and creative thinking, our intercultural capabilities, our literacies, being able to look at trained models that can answer questions on our curriculum allows us to start to investigate curriculum in different ways than we have before. And I think that's what I'm excited about, is the opportunity to look at curriculum from my perspective at an authority, but I think teaching, learning, pedagogy, assessment, reporting, the whole realm, from a different viewpoint in an easier way than ever before. And I think that's the exciting aspect. Is we've always said we don't want to just look at things in isolation, but in our current model, it's quite hard to look at things in a multidimensional form without essentially getting it all out and starting to pull it apart. What we can do is say, look at, and there are some Australian companies already beginning to do this, of, where are the great connections for me and my grade 2 class with the following areas for an Australian curriculum or a Victorian curriculum outcome that is this. And we're starting to get trained bots based on our curriculum. And I think that's what I'm excited about, is I think we're in the current general ChatGPT whole world aspect, which is amazing. But I also really like this idea of bespoke trained bots that can support us in our frameworks that we use in our classrooms every day, because Google never did that for us. You weren't able to, you had to learn a very specific site search or to be able to get what you want. And what we're being able to have is bots that are trained on our information, and then we can use both and dip in and out when we want.
Thank you. I might stay with you for now, Lauren, and move to the next question that I want to present to the panel. And that is, as we continue to kind of navigate this new age, and you've just shared a little bit there about what that new age looks like currently. And you're right in saying that we're only at the kind of embryonic stage of this. It's going to continue to evolve and probably evolve at a scale we've really never seen or had in our past. So in this new age, as we navigate it, it's obviously very crucial to strike a balance between embracing technology and working with it to support all learners, while also preserving those unique qualities that make us inherently human. Leon touched upon this before, Lauren. He mentioned creativity and critical thinking. So how can we use AI in education to harness and nurture our inherent creativity, critical thinking, and our emotional intelligence?
Thanks for that, Adriana. I think this is such an important question. It's a question that I was asked by my students when I was in my previous role at Melbourne Girls, when we were talking about this earlier in the year. And they said, and I think it's such an honest thing, if AI is doing all of this, what is the future of work for me? And we started to have a discussion on, well, what are the great things that make us human? What can't a robot do or a chatbot do that we can do in this space? And I think it's building on what Leon said. Teachers are amazing at catering to the individual needs in a classroom. They do that. How much more amazing is that teacher if the data is fully analysed and I know where each student is and I've got support on what is the best way to differentiate this, so that all of that behind the scenes admin work of the data dashboard and the lesson plan or the curriculum map at the different differentiated levels, if that bit's done, now I get to build the amazing relationships with my students with more knowledge than I had before, and being able to do that. And I think it's this partnership of really looking at how can we leverage these tools to enhance our human qualities, not replace them or undermine them. And I think if we look at the creative areas or literature or how this has worked, being able to look at suggesting improvements on the work that I've done or providing a scaffold to improve something I've done, not asking it to do the work for me, building on that is where the key is. And actually, I think the bit that's sort of students are starting to use this for, and I think it's we've got to get better as humans on the other end of this, and I'll pass on to someone else, is students that I've been working with feel quite safe actually asking AI bots probably quite deep personal questions of, I'm feeling this at the moment, and that sort of emotional regulation questions. But I think the critical bit will be to work on making sure that we have the appropriate supports on the other end to have those conversations, and we provide safe spaces for students where they feel that it is an enhancement to come and talk to a person and get that in that space. But I'll let some others speak as well. Adriano.
Sure, I might come to you, Leon. You touched upon this in your first response, this notion of how do we continue to lean into our inherent creativity, curiosity, critical thinking, and so on. How can we continue to use AI then as the curve, and then allow us to really amplify and value our inherent humanness in our learning context?
Yeah, I think a few really important points have been raised. So Michelle mentioned that we're a bit of an intersection at the moment of, it could go one way or the other. And I sort of want to speak to Lauren's student who asked about the future of careers and creativity. And, I know a lot of people who work in the creative industries, and a number of even organizations locally around here who work in the creative arts, where kids are asking those questions. And I want to kind of talk about what not to do, because there's a lot of that happening with AI at the moment, where we'll look at the video games industry, for example, where artists and illustrators in video games are being replaced with generative AI image generation, and then being rehired on a much lower wage to correct the atrocious over-fingered hands and some of the unusual errors that AI image generation throws up. So, in that instance, we're kind of replacing the good parts of creativity with the AI, and then we're outsourcing the sort of mundane parts. And I think we need to look at case studies and examples of things like that are happening right now across the world. And we need to really think, we are standing, as Michelle said, at that intersection. We don't want to continue down that path. And I think the way that we do that is through education and through educators getting across these technologies and having these conversations with their students and these young people to say, we don't want that as our future. And, we're already seeing the implications of this with the strikes in the US and all of the kind of globally, the impact that these technologies are having at a very rapid pace, and the creative industries in particular are responding to that. So I think that, it really comes down to how humans, how young people want to use these technologies, and then giving them the tools and the knowledge that they can advocate for themselves in that fashion. Because there's no denying that, generative AI has a huge capacity to improve the skills and capabilities of students from a technical point of view, making it easier to generate art, video, music, text, whatever. but we need to teach them how to really advocate for themselves and defend those creative rights.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Michelle, I'm going to come to you now. I'm going to continue this question that we've been exploring. One of the things that I continue to admire about the way in which you engage in this space, particularly through your role as head of digital at Haileybury, is your continual generosity across social media platforms, where you share so much of your learning and the discovery and the iteration that you're undertaking on a regular basis. I note that a couple of months ago, you were able to share with so many a bit of a kind of a traffic light formation, for others about where it can be used, where are the limits of its use, where no AI is going to be used, just to give your community a bit of clarity as we're just learning to navigate this space for the very first time. But what struck me the most about your particular post is that you really had a focus on the key principles of academic intelligence, ethics and critical thinking, privacy and security, and of course, creativity. So from your perspective, how can then we use AI in our education to continue to celebrate everything that makes us uniquely human?
Ironically, like today I was in a meeting with our head of humanities in the middle school, talking about a AI history unit that we were looking at introducing in the next little bit. And one of the things that she said is that this year she's seen an improvement in the students' work when it comes to research, that the introduction of AI and us talking about critical thinking and us talking about changing the focus of assessments on just writing to making sure that you can unpick an argument and you have the sources of where it came from, and providing students with the skills to identify rich sources, it's forcing us to do certain things. Mm-hmm. And by looking at it from that lens, the students' work is getting better because they're specifically and intentionally designing the curriculum with the knowledge that these tools are out there, and that with knowing that that's there, what do you need? What skills do we need students to develop? But also, how do we provide them with the scaffolding to do things the way we want them to kind of see the world, where you don't trust everything that's produced. We know that AI will produce things that are not true. We know that there are hallucinations, that it is only as good as the information that's put into it, and that the world is imperfect. So some of the information that is put into AI and that is used to train it is either biased or could be based on, there's almost that confirmation bias within the machine itself. And so that you do need to be able to look at something, analyze it and unpick it. And she was saying the students this year, more than any other year, are actually doing it a better way. And we're looking at how we can continue that pathway of being able to read something, unpick it and go, how do I respond to it? What's driving it, and where is the information coming from? So I do think that by making it intentional and putting those principles in front of the school and really trying to get teachers to engage with it, we're constructing a curriculum in a thoughtful way. It's forcing us to do all those things we've been talking about year upon year upon year about what good education looks like. It's actually kind of forcing us to do what we knew we already had to do. And we're seeing some benefits, but it's early days. So these are the first kind of things coming through. We've only been, ChatGPT has only been around since the end of November, and we're going to see a lot more change in the next few years. But the early signs from when you go in as a whole school with a whole school approach have been quite positive.
In your response just then, you touched upon this notion of skills. And for some time now, there's been lots and lots of conversation across the globe around us being in a skills revolution. That's, of course, not to diminish the value of knowledge, but we are seeing an increase in this emphasis. In Australia, for instance, 40% of jobs have a high probability of being automated by 2035, and more than 70% are likely to be substantially affected by automation and AI in the next 2 decades. That's quite scary statistics that I've got there from McCrindle and other organisations that continue to really play in this space in the world of work and the future of work. So I want to move down that line of thinking now and stay with you, Michelle. With this rapid kind of integration of AI in various industries, there's some nervousness. There's a nervousness and concern about potential displacement of human labour or humans, period. So in the context of education, how can we address the challenges that AI possesses and ensure that learners are actually equipped with the necessary skills and kind of graduate attributes for their future?
The only thing that's certain is that the future is uncertain. I do think that, and one of the, this is not a new thing, but I do think we're going to see increased change as things come through. So for me, when you look at that, dealing with uncertainty, having those core principles, knowing how to change, knowing how to learn, for me, those are the things that help you adapt. You need to be able to be confident in yourself. You need to be confident that you can learn new things and that you are not, don't love the term fixed mindset, but that you are someone who can adapt and change. And so, for me, those are some of the things that we need to prepare our education system for, as well as our students. It's murky. I think anyone who goes, we will need this part of the curriculum and not this part of the curriculum, or we'll need this or that. We had that app come out a few years ago that said, when will I be replaced by AI? I don't know. I think we've all kind of played with it. And it used to be like, if you're in the arts industry, you're safe. And then now we're looking at the kind of things that AI is doing and going like, well, I actually still think you're safe, but that wasn't even a question 10 years ago, that AI could be producing beautiful artworks like this.
Mm-hmm.
So dealing with that uncertainty and dealing with that change is going to be really important. Whenever I look at the supermarkets and the introduction of those automated checkout systems, you can imagine someone looking at that going, oh no, they're coming in and they're going to take my job. And you've got two reactions. One could be to go, well, I just don't want to have anything to do with them. And you'd probably end up being right, because you'd be the first one to go. But the people who look at it and go, okay, they're coming in and they're changing my job, I'm going to have to learn everything I can about them so that I'm the one they keep, and I'm the one that is involved in troubleshooting it and helping people when they need to learn it. That's the person who keeps their job. My problem is that, how do we do this in an equitable way where the kids who go to a school that prepares them for this kind of technology and this change doesn't get a too unfair advantage? How do we make sure that every child is given the opportunity to be the kid who can look at things and go, oh, I'm going to learn about it, and I'm going to look for what opportunities there are for more interesting work around it.
Okay. Leon, I want to stick with this kind of line of thinking, but I just want to push it a little bit further. I feel that in some ways, part of the conversation around challenging a one-size-fits-all kind of model and moving to new kind of learning ecosystems is now being centered around just of the disruptive nature of AI in education, and perhaps has forgotten about many other things that are impacting upon our world. Our very own CSIRO in Australia produced a once-in-a-decade report last year in 2022 called Our Future World, and they identified 7 global megatrends that kind of hold the key to the challenges and opportunities ahead. And in their report, they of course, these were the 7 areas: adopting to a changing climate, a leaner, cleaner, greener economy, the escalating health imperative across the globe, geopolitical shifts. We see them all the time. We're seeing it in our own part of the world with Taiwan and China. We see what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Obviously, diving into digital, increasingly becoming more and more prevalent, particularly in very developed countries, increasing autonomousness, as well as the rise of artificial intelligence. But the 7th one was this notion of unlocking the human dimension. So from your perspective, how do we then equip learners not only with the necessary skills and graduate attributes because of the pervasive nature of artificial intelligence, but all those things that are going on in our world? Big question, mate. Sorry.
That's an easy one. Give me a hard one next time. Look, we've been talking about this in education for a long time. You know, we've been talking about this for a lot longer than since ChatGPT dropped on us in November, and even longer than these technologies have been in their kind of current form. So I think it comes back to what we've all been talking about, which is valuing equity in education, valuing creativity and critical thinking in education, valuing those kinds of skills that can't be outsourced and automated away. Now, I would say that maybe, you know, the last 100 years, or however you want to timescale this, of education hasn't always been a very kind of conducive environment to those kind of skills. And for various reasons, we've drifted kind of to and from standardization and to and from high stakes testing and examinations and those kinds of things. And we have seen that some of that is just trends over time, and that it does come and go, and that we've had progressive waves of education in the past, and then, you know, more conservative waves of education. So I think that this is, in one sense, part of that continued kind of ebb and flow of these trends in education. But one thing that I think is really important to recognize is that certainly recently, you know, in the last kind of 12 years that I've been teaching in Australia, for example, a definite shift towards valuing the kinds of human skills that we're talking about. And that, you know, the resilience to change and the creativity and critical thinking and so on are really what that CSIRO report is talking about when it's talking about the privileging of humanness as one of its core kind of principles for future proofing. So, I mean, I guess the short answer to your question, Adriano, is I think we've been doing this. We've been doing this all along. And maybe this is now the opportunity to just really heighten and strengthen everything that's been happening there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lauren, I'm going to come to you now. You know, the VCAA should be really applauded for some time now. They have been really looking at different ways in which to reinvigorate curriculum that then becomes relevant to the world in which our young people are not only living in now, but the world in which they're going to ultimately lead. And, you know, for some time now, they've had a whole range of cross-curricular priorities built into the curriculum, one of which, of course, is this notion of sustainability. So I want to go into that space now, because I think it's a nice segue from what Leon has just shared with us. Environmental consciousness and sustainability are increasingly important in our world. Even that CSIRO report, you know, starts off by talking about adapting to the changing climate, the notion of a leaner, greener, cleaner kind of economies. I also know in my context that higher ed, our fashion and design students are really delving into this notion of upcycling and really making sure that landfill is not going to be saturated with fabrics and clothes, you know, that could easily be repurposed in so many different ways. So my question to you is, how can AI be better leveraged then to foster this kind of sense of responsibility and stewardship among Generation Alpha, empowering them to contribute to a kind of greener future?
Thanks, Adriano. I think it is. I think the first bit is it's important to Generation Alpha. This is the big thing: is they will inherit an Earth where global warming. We've had record heat waves over in Europe. We're now moving from La Nina to El Nino. Actually, the other way around, possibly. But in this way, we're moving in this, and our young people are incredibly aware of this. So where we can use AI in this space, I think I'll start by saying I went and saw Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. I don't agree with his, I suppose, tech optimism. I don't think that suddenly our food issues and our global warming issues can be fixed by AI. And look, he can battle me off in another session if you can get him to talk. But I think where we can is actually giving students the real-time feedback on their data. So you spoke about, Adriano, the fast fashion. I think being able to give students a real-time database on what's being consumed in their, you know, what are we buying? What does this look like? What is the effect? Giving that real feedback. And we've seen students do this with, I know at my previous school that I was at, students had a live dashboard of the solar panels that were on the ceiling in that space, and they could look at it and go, oh, okay, so we're getting this much and we need to try and make ourselves carbon neutral. But being able to do that, not just from a solar panel, but in terms of consumption and what that is there, is incredibly important. And then actually being able to give students, I think, whilst it's sitting in AI and technology, but I think a big awakening for me is if you've ever, and about 3 weeks ago, we had a speaker who talked about being in Antarctica. Now, I haven't been. The closest I'm probably going to be right now is probably in virtual reality, but being able to go back and look at certain areas and do that is something that our students will be able to experience, which might give them the hunger to go and do that in person. And I think we've got to be able to leverage in that space as well. And I think the other big bit is actually being able to have, and I spoke about this, of this new advent of trained chatbots or OpenAI, for students to be able to, I think, building on what Leon said, create their own eco-friendly personal assistant that will give them advice on how can I do this in a better way, and what can I do in this space of being able to do that, and then building that to be able to use AI to create a community building platform for students where they can link between other schools. We'll start to see the silos that we've seen great things happen, and the movements, I think, happen very quickly. We saw lots of young people, see Greta Thunberg as being a person that they wanted to look up to. We also saw her get attacked by adults in that space, and being able to do that. But by being able to have a greater way for students to have their voice in this space, and better mechanism to the data that really informs them. So, Greta did amazing research. She could tell you the effects of global warming. She had a privileged sort of educational background, and Michelle spoke about that democratization of an equity aspect. All students will be able to have access to data around environment. And with that data, I think humans can take action, not AI.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really love this notion, though, of an AI eco-assistant. It's almost like having a conscience, constantly reminding us to broaden our perspective about the decision we're just about to make, and its virtually, not only virtual impact, but real impact going forward. So it's really a fascinating idea.
I think, Adriano, it's the equivalent of my mother, who used to run around the house and tell me to turn off all the PowerPoints.
Right.
Because she used to do that.
Yeah.
These days I have smart plugs that do that, but students will have their version. Generation Alpha will have their version of their mother running around the house doing that. And it won't just be for the PowerPoints.
One of the interesting things about this conversation is that, again, I'm in a space where higher education have had meltdowns around the disruptive nature of language models like a ChatGPT and others. But we're a institute of higher education that actually has run towards it, particularly around platforms like DALL-E and Midjourney and so on, because they are kind of design-based and creative-based platforms that really enhance student learners. But we have adopted it in the process of the learning, not at the end point. And of course, because so much of what we do in an art and design context is design thinking methodology, the process is so significant. And that's where the struggle is, that's where the discernment is, that's where the iteration happens, and that's where the awakenings happen in these young people. And for them to be able to then to tap into an eco kind of AI assistant that enables them to always really just check themselves about what are they going to do here, and they're about to design something. How is this going to be impacting, the environment in a really pronounced way? Leon, I want to come to you, because we're often, so far our conversation is centered around the learner from a student context. I want to move that conversation to the learner of the teacher context now. And as AI continues to kind of shape the landscape of education, it's critical that we kind of empower our educators in schools with the necessary knowledge and skills to leverage its potential as well. You've written ad nauseum on this particular topic, and I really, really have valued your insight, your intellect, and your commitment to sharing with fellow educators what's kind of possible. I know in my own work, Yes, there's administrative assistance within our institute, but I'm finding that chat has become an invaluable assistant as I start to learn this space more and more, policies, practices, procedures, and so on. How can we then best support and equip teachers into integrating AI technologies in their teaching practice to ultimately enhance their student learning outcomes?
Mm-hmm. It's a really important question. I mean, for me, it's the highest question on my agenda as part of my PhD research and just the work that I do outside of that. And I'm really privileged now that I get to work with a lot of different schools and organizations. So I've stepped out of a secondary teaching role, but I'm working now with lots of organizations. And one that I've been working with recently, ACME in Melbourne, we ran a series on demystifying AI. And I think that's a really good starting point for these technologies, is to allow and encourage educators to kind of get their hands dirty and learn how to use these technologies, and also take into account that they're not mythical or magical or profoundly complex to use. And the minute you start using them, you learn for yourself the strengths and the limitations. As Lauren mentioned, we're very early days with the technology at the moment, and it will continue to improve. But I'm still finding it's the case that many people in education simply haven't had the time to engage with these technologies. So despite the media hype, it's still not the majority of teachers who are using this. It's not the majority of students or, the general population. So all that means that we've got to give time, energy, resources for teachers to learn how to grapple with this technology on their own terms, to kind of find out for themselves that it isn't this kind of magical beast that they need to contend with, and that it is actually just it's another extension of technologies that we've been using for years. The other side of that, and you briefly just mentioned it then, Adriano, is policy, effective policy. Mm-hmm. And this is where we're seeing the national framework for AI in schools in its draft consultation form. We've seen policies emerging from various state departments of education and organizations like QCAR, and Lauren, I'm sure that VCAA are heavily invested in getting something that the teachers can actually use, something that a policy that we can hang our hat on. So policy is not very spicy, maybe, but I think that effective policy has got to be a really, really core component of supporting teachers here.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm glad that you touched upon the policy thing, as I think that will enable us to have some standards that we can work up from and work as a base. Michelle, I want to come to you, because this probably now then extends into a conversation around ethics and values. They play such a significant role in shaping the future of AI in education, and that this is an area that so many are constantly talking about. Can I also take, particularly in the art and design world, right? Because there's lots of questions about who's actually now the artist and who's actually now the designer, and who owns the intellectual property of the work that's being generated in that particular platform. So it's a very interesting space to be playing in. I'm sure there are copyright lawyers and intellectual property lawyers out there going to be making a field day on this very, very soon, if not already. How can we integrate ethical considerations and distill regenerative ideas within the curriculum to empower Generation Alpha as stewards of the environment and advocates, ultimately, of social justice?
I think going back to a number of things that we've touched on, firstly, can I say that we have to do it? It's not a nice to have, because, like, as educators, we can affect the world around us in terms of through our students. They are the ones who are going to go out there, and so this is not a nice to have anymore. This is something that we need to make sure that they understand, because if we're going to have our politicians and our policymakers on a international and a national level be pressured into making decisions that serve the purposes of these students and of their futures, our students are going to need to advocate for it, and we're going to need to advocate for it too. To build it into the curriculum is a challenging thing. I spoke to our middle school teachers. I got given a whole staff day on AI this term, and as part of that, I was talking to a group of middle school teachers. And at the end, they were like, oh, great, can you come and deliver this to our kids? And I'm like, no, that's your job. We have to educate teachers first. We can't have one special expert going out there like some kind of Joan of Arc saying, follow me. We actually need to make sure that our teachers are building it into every topic. Every time we can talk about it, we should. Today, we got an email from a teacher saying, help. We can see that the student has used ChatGPT on their homework for Education Perfect. What do we do? And I'm like, be a teacher. This is not a technical problem. This is how we need to, this is where we need to come in. And this is where we need to talk about different ideas. It gets harder and harder when we start looking at, and they get older and we move away from academic integrity. I feel like sometimes academic integrity, we've been focusing on that as an education institution, not just because assessment is very important to us, but also because it's almost the easiest of the ethics to talk about. The nitty and gritty is the grey areas. Is it okay for an email to come out from the school that's written by AI rather than the teacher themselves? Is it okay for AI to write a report? Is it okay for a student, like you're saying, to use AI to produce an artwork if they're the one writing the prompt and then training the and adapting it and going through 6 or 7 iterations to make it perfect? Because I can tell you, as someone who uses Midjourney a lot, it's never the first one. I'm zooming out. I'm using very advanced language to try and get what I can see in my head out. So where is that grey area of you're using AI as a tool and you're not stealing from the people who trained the AI, perhaps without their own permissions? And I don't think there's going to be easy answers for any of this.
Yeah, no, but I like the idea of creating space for people to play and iterate and experiment. And I think that's what you were alluding to so much in what you were just sharing there for the adults. Now, that's always challenging in school environments and many educators who claim that they are, and not that they claim, because they are, in some contexts, what they are time poor. How do we flip that? Of course, I would argue that AI might be able to make them time rich, but again, that's about playing in that space. The interesting thing that struck me in what you said towards the end there, as a user of Midjourney, is a similar experience that I know the students that I support in art, design and enterprise at the moment, when they've been playing in that particular space. A couple of observations that I've made that has really improved their output. The first is they've actually had to learn the value of explicit language and the value of being really intentional in what they write. So it's actually sharpened their focus about what it is they want to say and ultimately achieve from an art or design context. Secondly, they are playing in a space where iteration is part of their normal learning process. So the inclusion of AI is simply another tool, no different than to a pencil, a paintbrush, a lino tool, some Adobe Illustrator and so on. For them, it's another tool that allows them then to test, to iterate, to challenge and refine. And we had a student, Matilda, whose work has just recently been featured in The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, where she was constantly trying to develop a particular pattern on fabric that she's making for one of her costumes, and wasn't able to work in partnership with a manufacturer to get the exact design that she wanted. But she then decided to use Midjourney and DALL-E to continue to refine her ideas from her original sketches and her original thoughts that's part of her artist's statement, and come up with the fabric that is now uniquely her own, and was able then to produce that on a scale and able to create the necessary costumes and garments that she wanted. So there's this interesting intersection between technology, working with technology to craft an end result. But it happened through constant iteration, intentionality, and a commitment to really just trialing and failing forward, which is, a concept that's not that foreign to many educators, but sometimes not that much explored. It also kind of touches upon what you mentioned, Michelle, some of the things that Lauren spoke about around we need to have some critical conversations around assessment. You know, what's that going to really look like going forward? And that those teachers who are having meltdowns around that we think someone has plagiarized or used that maybe the critical question that needs to be asked here is that assessment still going to be valuable in its current form? And do we now need to think of other ways in which to allow students in our care to demonstrate the evidence of those achievement standards that they're required to demonstrate? So I'm going to keep moving this conversation on because I am conscious of time. So I'm going to come to kind of the last joint question, and that is educators play a pivotal role in shaping the educational experiences of Generation Alpha. What strategies or resources can be implemented to ensure that teachers have access to the professional development opportunities to enable them to effectively utilize AI tools and platforms in the classroom? I'll start with you, Leon, and then I'll come to you, Lauren.
I think this overlaps a lot with everything else we've said this afternoon. So it's really important and necessary for organizations like the VCAA, for example, to put out consistent advice and resources. I know that, and Lauren and I were speaking briefly about this before we started, QCAR have got excellent resources out there around academic integrity, which are very sort of progressive and accepting of the technology and encourage teachers to explore positive ways to use technology. So getting our Department of Education and our curriculum and assessment authorities to provide teachers with consistent resourcing and consistent advice that can go cross-sectoral, make sure that nobody's disadvantaged or advantaged in any particular state or sector, I think is going to be really, really crucial over the next 12 to 18 months.
Lauren, over to you.
I think the critical thing for teachers, and I think whilst it's important for curriculum authorities to provide advice and support, what I don't want to lose in this space is the amazing autonomy we have in Victoria to design, develop and measure in our assessments in the classroom in Victoria. It's important to remember we have a curriculum, not a syllabus like other states do. And teachers have this amazing autonomy, and we're seeing it this year where I think I'm quite proud of the fact that our assessment principles of academic integrity and those things are standing the test of time in this space, because and so are, to be honest, the AITSL standards of knowing our students and what are the strategies for doing this. And I think what I don't want to end in get tucked into for this for teachers is policy on the run and policy in terms of AI, and then it becomes what are we doing next? We need to make sure that we're doing exactly what sort of Michelle said of what are those underlying principles of education, of how we support, and how do we make sure that it's not punitive? And I think this is, and how do we get teachers to be empowered to do this? And I think sessions like we're doing right now, which empower and engender a sense of community, is where we are seeing this. I was in a VCAA literature subject community on Facebook, and they had an amazing thread of, well, how are we looking at AI? Teachers at the moment have the answers. They spoke about process journals. They spoke about what you've talked about with your traffic lights, Michelle, and all of this. But I think what we don't do at the moment is provide a time, a space, and possibly a place for those conversations to then inform policy and encourage and empower teachers to I think embrace the autonomy that they have. I reflect in my career, and I'm now in a role where people talk about my sphere of influence in this space. What I can say is I've never been more autonomous than when I've been in my classroom with my students. And I think teachers often forget that when you are there in that classroom for that 60 minutes or what that is, you are the key person. All of the policies in the world are not going to support your actions there. And I think what we need to be able to do is get that baseline for teachers to feel safe in that classroom with that autonomy, and that they have the tools. And I think the final bit would be to build on what Leon said earlier around professional learning. we have failed, and I've worked in digital learning, so I will say this, we have failed our teachers time and time again in this space where we've left people behind, where we've gone, oh, Microsoft Word is easy. We don't need to provide Microsoft Word professional learning anymore. I can tell you, and I know Michelle, if I put a question out today, even in my own department, of who would be interested in some intermediate word skills training, I would fill that tomorrow. That's because we've failed. We've left people behind. We haven't empowered them. And we assume that because something is commonplace, it is easy. This is where we have to
that's really
make sure that.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Lauren, because I'm conscious of time. I do want to keep moving, but I think what's interesting that you raised there is then one of the key strategies that we really need to consider is how are we going to be deeply conscious about not making assumptions about what people understand and what they don't understand, and how do we continue to create space for them, safe spaces for the adults as well as the young people in our care to continue to experiment within this area. The other thing that's interesting that you raised there, I love this notion about autonomy and the difference between curriculum and syllabus and so on. You know, I think this is where we forget that a great a publication like what VCAA has done with the K-10 curriculum across disciplines and cross-curricular priorities and so on, and capabilities, of course, is it's providing us with important desirable outcomes of achievement standards. But we ultimately then in our local context determine how a student is going to provide the evidence for that. And the reality is that it doesn't have to be the same as what our neighbour is doing, because it might not be appropriate for our context. And, you know, Michelle, I want to come to you on this final point, because you're at a dynamic learning secondary and primary education place here, not only in Melbourne, but of course across Australia and globally with campuses across the board. But your particular college has, of course, embarked on in this kind of digital space in a very pronounced way with an online campus as well. So you're constantly thinking about new ways in which for people to connect to learning anytime, anywhere, by anyone. What's your kind of general feeling around ultimately how AI can play a role in promoting excellence and equity then in education?
I think for me, we know that you learn best when we close that feedback loop, that the distance between when you learn something and when you put it into action and you getting a response to know, yep, that's correct, or no, that's not. The speed you do that, the faster you learn. It's why video games are really good at teaching you things. You learn a huge amount, and you have to learn a huge amount when you play a video game. What I think that AI can do is help us close that feedback loop of learning and provide more opportunities for students to learn anytime, anywhere, at their own pace. The role of the teacher is the things that technology is not very good at doing. Like, we know that MOOCs weren't successful because there was very little relationship, there was very little motivation involved in them. And so I think, like, what we need to do is look at what we know about other technologies and use that to inform how we look at AI and its use in the classroom. So I do think that it's going to provide us with a lot of opportunities to remove barriers if we use it the right way, and with a learner at our hearts. And like Leon said, we know a lot about learning. We know a lot about how technology informs learning. A lot of that isn't new. So we can apply that to what we do in the future.
Leon, I'll come to you with that same question about, you know, what role can AI play in promoting equity and excellence and equity in education? And I know Michelle just touched upon what I shared as well, in this notion of anywhere, anytime, by anyone. Of course, none of us are naive to the fact that is dependent on access to bandwidth, access to devices that enable us to do that. And not everyone across this globe has that privilege. And so a divide could easily be created. We saw that divide really become pronounced during COVID in those areas that were able to pivot to a kind of online learning environment from a remote context from their home campus, to those parts of the world where many had none of that access, and that for substantial amounts of time, learning in any kind of formal sense had stopped for them. How can these advancements in AI really try and promote this notion of equity and excellence?
I think all of these technologies and these emerging technologies which intersect with AI have to be taken into consideration. So, you know, since remote learning, and I'm out here on a farm in southwest Victoria, so remote learning for me was sitting in my car at the top of the nearest hill, trying desperately to get mobile reception most of the time. And the nearest hill's about 10 kilometers away. So a lot of our students suffered from what you've just said there, not being able to access that during that time. But we've already seen in the last couple of years improvements with students having access now to much less expensive satellite broadband infrastructures and things like that. And I think that it's going to take a huge sort of system-wide approach to making sure that students have equitable access to the technologies that are being used are of comparable quality. So there isn't a sort of free version and then a paid premium version, which is significantly better, but that only some people can access. I think that, you know, that's a potential issue there. And I don't think that, you know, teachers aren't necessarily going to be the ones on the ground dealing with that. That's a real system-wide kind of issue. So I think it's productive that we've seen the kind of work that's coming out of Australia at a state and a federal level compared to what I'm seeing happen in other places across the world. I think Australia is being really proactive there. So, you know, I'm optimistic on that front. Yeah.
Lauren, did you want to jump in here at all? Have the final word before I wrap this up?
You know, I'm never short of a word. I think the equity bit in this is making sure, and this week I've had, you know, I've got the privilege at the moment to be on a judging panel for VCAA leadership, of the VCAA Leader of the Year. And I think in this space, when you hear from students talk about how they enact change in a leadership capacity, it might be using tech as a tool, but it is the human connections of what they do in building a movement with their people next to them and their awareness that I don't think we spoke earlier about privilege, Adriana. I had a young person the other day say the best thing that I've learned is how to lead from the back, because I can't speak for everyone. It's not my story. And this is a young student doing this. I think most adults struggle to see that as a leadership lesson, but I think the equity piece is empowering our human voices that are with us to have that, to be able to bring their voice to a level where there is decision making. And AI may support them with the data, but I think on the other end, that the equity piece in education is giving the people who use the pen or the stylus every day, they need to hold the pen in terms of the policy and the decision. And I think that's how we'll get equity in AI. I think we've got a great start with a framework and we're looking at ethics, but the final bit needs to be give these young people the voice to be able to do this, because I'm seeing more than ever students being much more critical and critical users of technology. I know students that do not have social media profiles because they choose not to, and they don't let their parents put photos of them up on Facebook. I think we are seeing, I've said this before, this is one of the most ethical generations ever. Let's let them lead and let them be part of the discussion instead of going, how do we control them? Yeah. I think if we empower them.
Yeah, that's really powerful, and it's a beautiful way to kind of finish there. I love what you're just sharing there, because fundamentally then it is about giving them access to their own possibility, but access to the tools for them then to make ultimately the decisions that they feel is appropriate for them. So to Lauren, to Leon, and to Michelle, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It has been an enlightening conversation, and we continue in education to be fortunate by your voices and your commitment in this space to continue to challenge us about what's possible. And to finish up, I want to just say this, you know, in this kind of age of humans, let us remember that progress is not solely defined by technological advancement, but of course by the elevation of our human spirit. And as we prepare for Generation Alpha, because that's the reality of who's next, for a purposeful future, their purposeful future, May we prioritise a kind of human-led and regenerative kind of education that fosters creativity, emotional intelligence, and ethical decision-making, one that equips them with the knowledge and the skills to embrace technology as a tool while cherishing the values that make us uniquely human. Together, let us embark on this shared endeavour, empowering Generation Alpha to build a future where human potential flourishes, where technology serves as an enabler rather than a substitute, and where regenerative ideals guide us towards a world that is ultimately far more harmonious, sustainable, inclusive, and just. The age of humans awaits, and with it, limitless possibilities. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Adriano, for leading that discussion. I have been taking many notes.
Yes.
A few of you are going to get emails.
Right.
With both questions and thoughts. Thank you all. Thank you for giving of your time. I never forget that all of you are educators and have very full workloads, and yet are generous with sharing your knowledge and your assistance to other educators and anyone else too, really. So thank you again very much. And thank you, Adriano, for leading the session.
Thanks for the invitation, Carolyn. It's been great.
My